Today on Security and Compliance Weekly, we're talking to Brian Tremblay, the compliance practice leader at Anapsys Incorporated. Brian's here to talk about his rather unique journey into security and compliance, namely that he's coming from the auditing side of the world, which might be the real extreme right if you think about it. We're going to talk about how he's been converted over to security. Our first segment, we're going to be devoted to talking to Brian about some of the problems that he's seen coming over to the dark side or the right side, and how we can maybe try to find a balance between security and compliance from his perspective. In our second segment, we're going to talk about how to solve some of the problems we describe in the first segment, and particularly how Anapsys can help out solving the problems with some of their tools. So we're going to have a fun-packed day. Have your drinks ready because some particular acronym is bound to pop up sooner or later. So we're looking forward to this conversation. And join us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome to episode number 35 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on July 14th, 2020. Today's show is sponsored by Anapsys Incorporated. Anapsys is a Boston-based computer and network security company that's focused on protecting the mission-critical applications that run your business. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann. Joining me today are my illustrious co-hosts, Josh Marpet, Scott Lyons, and John Snyder, Esquire. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you again, sir.
Let's start with a couple announcements before we jump into our interview. First, join the Security Weekly mailing list for webcast and virtual training announcements and to receive your personal invitation to our Discord server. You can do this by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe and clicking the button to join the list. And also, with all the recent changes to Black Hat and DEF CON, that is canceling the live events in Vegas, we realized at Security Weekly that we can keep doing what we do best, which is hosting virtual podcasts. So we're proud to announce Hacker Summer Camp 2020, a Security Weekly virtual live stream event, which will be August 3rd through August 6th, 2020. To reserve your slot now, visit securityweekly.com/summercamp 2020. It won't be the same, and it just won't be the same, but it'll be the next best thing. So join us. All righty. So as I mentioned in our preamble, we are talking today to Brian Tremblay. Welcome, Brian, to the show.
Hey, thanks, Jeff, for having me. Thank you to the team for inviting me to speak with you all. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about my journey into security and, what Anapsys is and does and how it can help, and also to talk about a brand new vulnerability and patch that SAP put out literally today that has some pretty significant compliance implications.
Interesting. Well, that hot off the presses, is so to speak. So we'll hopefully get to that shortly. We mentioned that, or I mentioned that you have sort of a different route to security coming from the audit side of the world, and we're interested in hearing about that. And I actually I have a question related to that we'll get to shortly. But we like to start off our interviews with our guests by asking everybody essentially the same question, and we call it the hot seat question. So, before we know anything about your background and why you think the way you do, if you could just sort of respond with your thoughts on the question, what is your take? What is your view on, and where do you sit? Where do you fall on what we call the security and versus compliance continuum?
So it's an interesting question, especially coming from, that audit and compliance background. But, a lot of times I think that we've got two communities that have very different focal areas. And, my position here at Onapsis has shown me that really to move up that continuum is to do it together. You can't do it alone. You can't do it in a silo. You can't do it, by yourself. And I think when I look at some of the takeaways that I've had joining Onapsis, it's, security, IT, the finance organization, audit, all look at it differently and in very narrow focal areas. And as a result, I think that manifests blind spots, that manifests issues. And my view, and I hope to talk a little bit about this in the second half, is you need to find a way to move it together. You need to find a way to get together and move forward, more unanimously together as a group on something like this, especially when you're talking about enterprise resource planning, security, which is kind of where Onapsis really focuses. So I hope that answered your question.
Well, it's an opinion, subjective question, so there are no right or wrong answers. So before I ask my next question, I guess it'd probably be better for you to just, tell us a little bit about how you got into security and compliance, because you alluded to, and I shared in our preamble, that you sort of came from the opposite side, the dark side, depending on your viewpoint. But how'd you get into security?
Yeah, I mean, I think I got into it because someone in security showed me the light. I think when you use the dark side, it's not that far off of how I felt as I started to learn more about security. I felt literally for the 15 plus years I was in audit and compliance that I was living in the dark. My journey into security started with a conversation with someone on Onapsis. I was I was a head of audit at a publicly traded company. I got invited to a lunch after a training that a local audit group was putting on. And he started to ask me questions like, hey, what if I told you there's a way that an unauthenticated user could get into your system and change bank records? Is that a problem for something like Sarbanes-Oxley? And I said, right. At first I was like, this just feels like a trap. How do I answer anything but yeah, that's a huge problem. So I said, yeah, that would be a problem because you're bypassing controls, that are relevant for SOX. And as he kept on giving me example after example after example, I started to get uncomfortable and more uncomfortable. And then I just asked him to stop. I said, okay, my brain can't handle this. I mean, it's kind of like, I was living in the matrix, right? The world of audit and compliance that I was living in was not real because there were all these other issues, vulnerabilities. I didn't even know what a misconfiguration was until I joined Onapsis, but all of these things creating risks in your environment, especially compliance risks. I just had to become part of that story, part of the starting to thread together, the security risks that we find when we run scans in our customers' environments or complementary scans in our prospects' environments, and helping people understand how, code and transport or a misconfiguration can create a massive compliance risk for an organization.
So the question I wanted to ask, and I'm trying to figure out how to sort of frame it right, but after our planning call, and you were talking about how you would come from the audit side of the world, that you started out as and correct me if I'm wrong, more of a financial auditor. You're an accountant by training. And sort of that traditional route, it made me think back to sort of the early days, at least for me, in the private sector, doing commercial consulting for private companies, and so this is late 90s, and already back then accounting firms, it used to be the big five, but the accounting firms were latching on to, let's do security assessments, vulnerability and threat assessments, all this kind of stuff. And I always kind of wondered back then, why in the world would anybody hire an auditing firm to take a look at their security practices, their security implementations? And I guess my question to you, having come from that background, do you have any insight? Can you enlighten me in any way, shape, or form as to why big five accounting firms, why they got into this business in the first place? I mean, I have theories, but I don't know that I know the real answer. I don't know if you know the real answer, but I'm curious as to whether you have any insights into that.
Yeah, I mean, back in the 90s, and certainly before Enron and WorldCom and all that stuff, and a lot of these, the big five became the big four, and a lot of these practices got kind of spun off, and since then they've come in a little bit. But I think they viewed it as a way to make money, and I think they viewed that when you're looking at like a finance organization, or you're working very closely with the financial organization, like CFO's organization, you can come in there and say, hey, we should be off. We can give you a penetration test, and we can tell you what's wrong, and if people can do some stuff. And I think part of it was, you've got maybe a lightly or moderately educated consultant who can come in there and talk to a controller or an auditor or something like that and say, hey, we can do this, and we're going to make you feel better and safer. And in the audit world in particular, it's all about risk, right? So I think that's part of it. I think also, some of the firms had really, really strong experts in-house where they could go a little bit more toe-to-toe with security. And knowing what I know now with security, my presumption is it's evolved over the last 30 years. There's much more knowledge and expertise. And I mean, even if you look at Onapsis, we're very specific and narrow in where we focus in security. So I think part of it was you had an uneducated and still uneducated, base in the finance and audit organizations about security. But some of those big five consulting practices did hire experts away from organizations that could come in there and even sell it to a security organization. I don't think it was really as prevalent then as it is today. But I mean, a lot of the people and partners that we work with, certainly do have those cyber experts or security experts, on staff that they've taken away from, organizations or consulting firms to kind of go toe to toe with security on this type of stuff.
I'm going to throw my shoe in the ring and say that I think it's because there was a void in the security and compliance world. The financial auditors, the accounting firms, the big four, the big five, the big 17, whatever the hell it was at the time, were like, hey, we're licensed, we're certified, we have the people that are experienced in audit, and none of the companies that were around at the time, pen testing and security companies, they were all like, oh, we want to do pen testing. We don't want, like, audit is boring. Oh, God. So there was a void in the marketplace. And that's why I think that happened. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think that void may be smaller today, but I think it still exists. When I look at who we partner with, we sell a solution, right? Like, we don't sell the consulting typically. We don't sell how your organization should be using our tool. We sell you a tool, and it has some incredible capabilities out of the box. But, even when I look at the partners that we work with, most of them still aren't focused on audit and compliance. They're broadly focused on cyber security. So maybe the void was huge 30 years ago. it's still pretty big, which, why I wanted to kind of insert myself into that void, working for Onapsis and starting to help fill that void with more information. So I totally agree.
So it's interesting to me that just sort of the different perspectives that you have on this, based on where you come from. I coming out of the security world and going to work for consulting, my small little company, the practice that I was working for at the time, was competing against the Big Five. And of course, we were struggling with competing against the Big Five because they had lots of resources. They were already embedded in a lot of the companies that we were trying to do business with. And that was one of our sort of jokes, as it were, was if we'd show up at a client and we'd be walking around, usually whatever the Big Five firm was, they had their own office with their name on the door type of thing. That's how embedded they were in the culture of these companies. And I guess I viewed it at the time as sort of it was a competitive thing, obviously, since we were trying to do business there. But I don't want to dwell on that. It was just something that I was, just kind of curious about. So you came from the auditing side of the world, and you alluded to, and I forget the exact wording you used. You had your eyes opened. You saw the light. What was it like? Give us a little bit more color commentary on what it meant to come from the audit perspective, where you thought you were doing security things, cybersecurity things, and then you were introduced to Onapsis and a different way of looking at security.
Yeah, so like I mentioned when we were talking earlier, at first I was terrified, for my organization. I was terrified for my profession, quite frankly. I mean, we've been doing, IT general controls audits for SOX, for example. This is basically the same way for 20 years now, 30 years now. And I was afraid. But then very quickly, I thought about, well,
I was petrified.
Yeah, I mean, worse. I mean, I kind of wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear and go to my, board and senior leadership team and be like, I've been doing you, an incomplete service for the rest of, for my entire career. But then I thought, well, what I really want to do is start communicating this outward. I want to communicate, hey, what exists in security is a different manifestation of the risks that you're already looking for: privileged access, changes to your system. And what security is showing you are very, very different ways to manifest that risk, which means an organization has to have many, many different ways to resolve or mitigate or monitor that risk. So I started fearful, and then very quickly saw the opportunity to help the profession, which is why, I'm trying to work closely with the professional organizations, supporting, audit and accounting, and also doing things like this, because I think it's important to be talking about these things, because for 15 years, I had never heard anyone talking about it. So we need to start the conversation, in the compliance and audit space. This is like a big deal. And it'll only be a matter of time, quite frankly, until the regulators jump on board. I mean, you've seen them start to dip their toes in it, from cybersecurity. It used to start with a questionnaire. And then, now they're likely going to start, actually having the public accounting firms get in there and start looking at their security programs a little bit more. I think we're a little ways away from that, where it becomes part of the audit. But I mean, I think it's get the message out there now, because it's going to become a reality in the future that we're all going to have to deal with this as part of the audit.
It's interesting that. Excuse me a minute. Go ahead. No, you first, and I'll.
Oh, okay.
I'll try to remember my thought.
So, Brian, hey, John Snyder, just so you know, my background is I was a trial attorney for close to 20 years, and then moved over to the artificial intelligence sphere. And one thing that I've seen, and I'll just sort of give you the perception and see what you think of it, is we're having kind of a clash between the technologists and the lawyers / accountant types over, who's in control. Over the last, several generations, as bureaucracies have taken hold, lawyers have managed to take control over a lot of day-to-day operations. And now with cybersecurity and compliance being so technical, lawyers are very much fearful that they're being displaced by the technologists. And so I was wondering whether that's sort of a dynamic that you see in your reality, and if so, how you see that resolving over the next several years.
I mean, my experience around these types of things is that, organizations, the ones that I've worked with at least, are leaning more on their lawyers now more than ever because they don't have the expertise. They don't have, the knowledge. They see these risks or these issues, right? So if you think about it, there have been companies that have had material weaknesses in their financial statements because they've erroneously put some bad coding in that actually changed how revenue reports are being generated, and they were being generated wrong. So in a situation like that where, a client may find them, fix them, and then go to the auditor, and the auditor is going to freak out because that's what they do around revenue in particular, and those numbers in the financials, what I see organizations, I see counsel, I see risk going right to the lawyers and saying, hey, like our auditors are saying like this is a big deal. We don't have a cybersecurity expert on staff. We have security resources on staff and IT resources that are telling us we fixed it. But I feel like the more you implement technology where you have a lot of experts or not a lot, a handful of experts that really know it, an organization agrees to use it. But then when there's issues with it or it finds issues, they go to the lawyers because they don't know how to deal with the issues, quite frankly, because that's just not what organizations are equipping themselves to do. They're looking at technology as an awesome lever for, efficiency, in some cases, better return on investment, redeployment of resources, and things like that. But they still don't have the expertise more often than not in-house to deal with the implications of what that technology may do or what it may find. So the lawyers, at my prior company and the outside counsel at my prior company were still gainfully employed and doing quite well for themselves.
So if I may just follow up, we've seen over the last several months with COVID and the great virtualization, I guess you could call it. Some people say that we've made 5 to 7 years worth of tech adoption in 2 weeks. I was wondering how you see the advent of hundreds of millions of people working from home as complicating the security picture.
I mean, it's massively complicating the security picture. When we look at, risks and threats to your enterprise resource planning system, your SAPs, Oracles, or whatever you're using to process your financial information, the risk landscape got massively huge when everyone went from home because for the most part, these things sit on your network, right? So your risk landscape, well, it may be huge because if you think about who's on your network, it's not only your employees, it's contractors, third parties, who have their technologies accessing your network, provide a way into your network. Generally, you could say the risk was somewhat contained when you were talking about your network. But what a lot of organizations were forced to do very quickly was open up parts of their network to the internet, because from a business perspective, that's what made the most sense. Now, what people weren't thinking about were what that meant. So if you're opening up, processing transactions on your ERP to, out people on the internet, you basically just opened up your whole ERP to every single vulnerability and misconfiguration, that's out there. And we'll probably hopefully talk about it later, but that's kind of the big deal with the recon vulnerability that, we're talking about today that was released that the patch was released for last night. This was something that is impacting at least 2,500 companies because they've got their SAP ERP exposed to the internet. It's something that you can patch. It's something that, we worked with SAP on to create a patch in a record time. Usually you're talking months and even longer to get a patch out. This was something that we worked with in May, and the patch is out in July. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. I think it might be the quickest in actually SAP's history, because this is something that scored a 10 out of 10 on the CVSS scale because of the significance for people that have this issue. So I think the threat landscape got exponentially more significant for organizations because so many started sharing stuff out, on the internet because they had to. That's what the business justified at the time. And, unfortunately, if they're not investing in trying to kind of rein that back in after the initial kind of surge of everyone working from home, then unfortunately they're leaving their networks and their ERPs and other things just exposed.
Yeah, and if I'll just ask one follow-up and close the loop, and then we'll get back to the other question. But
Sure.
Looking down the field, 3, 6, 9, 12 months, we have a lot of, or we have some lawyers that watch this show and trying to figure out what the trends in law are going to be. For one thing, there's a great debate within legal circles over whether to archive Zoom calls or not. But looking down the field, what sort of issues do you think are going to be prominent and litigated and fought over, in this new environment where everybody's working from home, where systems are open to a degree that they never have been? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think you will see it. You will see it in a sense that there will be, issues that organizations will specifically point to that were caused by COVID. So you'll have a situation where an organization was forced to open up their ERP to the internet because, that's the only way they could do business. And as a result, somebody took advantage of that and then, infiltrated their network and maybe manipulated information in their ERP or stole a bunch of information, or stole money, like through manipulating the vendor file. And I think what you're going to see is especially if they're publicly traded, what you always see, a shareholder lawsuit. Hey, we disclosed that we were breached. We saw, we saw the stock price go down 20%. And I don't know what the magic number is, but there seems to be, like in any given trading day, if your stock dips a certain amount, say 10% or more, there seems to be a shareholder suit that follows like later that afternoon, a class action suit that follows later that afternoon.
That's correct. That is accurate. And I spent many years litigating those.
Yeah. So I don't know what the magic number is, but there is one. And I think what you're going to see is organizations kind of throwing their hands up going, what were we supposed to do? This pandemic blindsided, pretty much everybody. We had to do business, to protect our shareholders, right? So as a result, we created a risk that we weren't aware of. We got banged by it, and here's what we're going to do to remediate it, because that's just what happens around lawsuits and if you get dinged by the regulators, it's we were doing the best we can at the time. We have more information now, and here's how we're going to do better. So I guess long story longer, it's kind of, I think, just going to be the status quo of how these things kind of happen. I think you're going to see the suits show up and organizations kind of say, yeah, like we did the best we could. I don't know what else we could have done, in order to keep our business running. While you were asking the question, another thing that I was really kind of thinking about, from an audit perspective and a compliance perspective is you've got a lot of these audit firms kind of dropping technologies to do their audits into your environment. And I've always been kind of curious, why organizations kind of let that happen, like without even really thinking about it. So one of the things that I think is kind of an interesting thought that, you kind of got my gears turning on is like, well, these tools and technologies get more mature and robust and they're finding more issues. And at what point does a company go, well, you never really told us what you're doing in your environment. You found something that might have been a little bit out of bounds for a financial statement audit. and it's generating a disclosable situation in our financial statements, and our stock price is going to get hammered. So we're going to actually fight you on disclosing that, or codifying it as a material weakness or something that requires disclosure, because those technologies are they're so invasive, and year in and year out, what I saw from being audited was they always find something. They're always looking for more things, and I kind of asked myself as a head of audit, like, how do you even defend against these types of things, because you don't know what they're really looking for, or how they're moving through your ERP or your network to find these things. But they're finding things every year. And at what point do lawyers get involved and say, okay, guys, like, that's enough. Like, you can't just drop your technologies in here because finance says it's okay, because they don't understand the implications. I think that's kind of something that kind of got my gears turning, now from a security perspective, is you don't really know what they're doing when they put those things in your network anyways. And again, I think it could be the type of thing where the tools and technologies get so mature, they start finding real big issues, maybe big security issues, if they start looking for them. And then the lawyers get involved trying to defend the company from all, these types of disclosable findings in their financial statements from their audits. Sorry to go off on the tangent there.
No, that's okay.
So I would take it as one of the things that I guess that you're trying to allude to is when people have outside vendors come in and start looking at their network, they should put everything on a set aside network that the auditor wants to use, and then go through and check it before it gets added into production. Is that correct?
I mean, you could do that, but I think part of what I'm suggesting is understand what you're actually allowing onto your network. I mean, what the auditors might say is, hey, look, like, we can't take a clone of production, like, we can't take a clone of this, or we can't take anything other than the gospel, which is your production, like ERP or your actual network. But what I'm suggesting is know what those tools are, know what they're doing, know what they're looking for, and find a way to get comfortable with letting those things on your network. Because what auditors do is say, hey, this is part of the audit. You do whatever you need to do. They go and tell IT, yeah, like, you can trust these guys. Like, maybe we have like an NDA, or maybe we have some type of paperwork or something, that makes us say, yeah, you can just trust these auditors to kind of do their thing. But again, like, I've learned in the security perspective, from joining a security firm, is they just don't know what they don't know. Like, the biggest part of my job is just education. And again, that's kind of how I'm thinking about this is you should really educate yourselves on what you're letting into your network, even from your kind of trusted external auditors, because they don't tell you. They say, oh, it's just going to check this. Don't worry about it. But who knows? Every year it gets more deep. It gets more invasive. They just keep on, combing and going through, looking for more and more things. And I share that just from the experience of being audited, for the last, 10 or 12 years when I've been working for companies after I did external audit. So
I must just capture the irony that you're saying that one potentially significant security weakness that might even have to be reported in an audit is the audit itself.
Could be.
It's possible. Yeah. I mean, I've had occasions where somebody dropped in just a vulnerability scanner or something like that, and the appliance itself that the scanner was running on was failing the scan. I've been holding on to this question for like 10 minutes now, and I need to get it out. And it's a somewhat of a question, somewhat of an observation. But on our Discord server, we were chatting earlier on where we were talking about why did auditors get into this game in the first place, and somebody commented, because they're embedded, and that's like I guess like a comfort factor, even trust relationship that's already established. But somebody was commenting that the audit process is good at focusing on people and process and methodology, and what I'm inferring from that is what was missing, and what's the security side is the focus on the technology and the actual capabilities of what you can and can't do with the technology and how you can exploit the technology, which I find interesting, because I think one of the things that I see missing in where we are today as an industry is too much focus on the technology and not enough focus on the people and the process and the methodology. Even your most recent comment about dropping appliances in to help with the audit, that's an attempt, I think, at sort of crossing the streams between the audit process side and the technology rubber meets the road side of things. And I hate to say it, but I'm wondering if there needs to be because I'm a adamant fan of the security side, but not so much the technology automated aspects of it, but knowing what you can actually do with the technology. And maybe there's still a lesson to be learned. Maybe both sides can learn something still, the audit focused, looking at the people and the processes, understanding, do you follow your steps, versus no, the technology, you can really do this with things. So I guess it's more of a comment, and maybe we need to take a break real quick. We can take that up. Final question very quickly based on the conversation in the Discord server is, Brian, do you like karaoke?
Are you not really, because I have a terrible singing voice. Like, puberty was not kind to me.
Which is pretty much irrelevant for karaoke. I'm just saying.
Yeah. There's not really.
I don't know if you're going to get a choice. We'll see.
Yeah. So
you might get roped into something.
Not on this show, but apparently we are. Danny Akaki just confirmed we're doing hacker karaoke sometime in the next few months. So anybody that we all come in contact with, I think we're just roping them in.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine.
I think the right question is, do you like getting drunk in a swampy, windowless room with friends?
Well,
yeah, I mean,
that
I thoroughly enjoy, and I would just like to say,
technically speaking, we already do that with our friends over Zoom.
Got it.
Yeah,
right,
I was going to say,
it doesn't stop you being drunk in a windowless room. Let's be clear.
Yeah, well, I've been trying to get in that, I'll just be switching to a lot of a different clear liquid than what I'm drinking today if this is really going to happen. And then it'll all be good because I won't remember it.
Well, consider yourself invited. But we need to take a break real quick, and we'll come back, pick up the discussion again, and sort of shift gears and try to talk about how do we fix all these problems and these disconnects that we've been describing. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.